Hi everybody, and welcome back to yet another installment of this week's stuff. It's a lot just because I like talking about it, so hopefully that's okay with you. So, um, this is just a summary of the previous videos, so if you just haven't been paying attention or you skipped this one, that's what you missed. We examined the functionalist, interactionist, and conflict and feminist perspectives and how they relate to deviance. First one of the series examine what deviance is, though. So if you don't know what deviance is by now, check that out. But so now we know what deviance is. We know that we are deviant. We know the different theoretical perspectives of deviance, but how do we stop it? Some of the theoretical perspectives we already talked about, such as in labeling theory, we could stop labels. With social disorganization, we could create relationships, we could create parks, build sidewalks, that kind of thing. But overall, how do we stop deviance? Well, our answer is this thing called social control. Back in our video regarding interactionist theory with different theories, it was kind of like the last slide. It talked about social control theory and how our interactions can kind of mitigate the deviance that we act upon. That's basically what social control is in a nutshell. It's a pretty big topic and it's hard to describe in just a little video. But basically, for our concerns, it's the prevention of deviance via different techniques and strategies in all levels of society. From we talked about human interaction and interactions perspective with your peer groups. You guys also talked about that in previous weeks. But it can be there. It can be your family. It can be your work. It can be your government. All the way, all of them. And the level of social control can be formal and informal, just like norms. So again, kind of like informal, they're casually enforced. Thinking about your body language, you might smile if somebody's doing things right. You see this all the time in kids, kind of similar to my norm explanation. Laughter, raising your eyebrows a little bit if it's a little bit hairy, like, oh, should we be doing this? Thinking about your reaction to the elevator scenario, right? If somebody was just like in a corner, or what's your reaction like if I were to lecture like this the whole time? It's not very interactive. Hopefully you guys are licking my face here. I'm getting used to it. But anyway, so there's a lot of informal ways. You could also just, stop talking to a person or just kind of turn away if you don't really like what they're suggesting or what they're doing. You could also have formal types of social control too. So usually this is because authorized agents like judges or police officers, attorneys, that kind of thing get involved, and because there's the law. And so that's more formal forms of social control. And with regarding law, some laws affect everybody, right? So we have like national laws, where you're supposed to stop at a stoplight when it's red, that kind of thing. However, other laws are only for particular groups of people or particular categories of people. So if you kind of think back to my fishing example with the net metaphor, some states don't have fishing licenses or things like that. So it's only for a particular state or particular residents, right? Each state has their own laws. I'm thinking about traffic laws in particular, since if you don't know the state's traffic laws, you could get in trouble for not following them. Not that I have any experience with that. And then this also, thinking about social control, and it's very 1984 with the government always watching you and that kind of thing. But it also comes back to the Milgram experiment where the person got shocked. And then in this week's videos, for supplemental material, there's the actual documentary about the original experiment. I just hate the audio quality. I'm like a very audiophile person, and it just grinds my gears. So you don't have to watch it if you don't want to. But regarding this, it kind of goes back also to Merton's forms of adaptation with conformity, because what conformity is in regarding social control is that basically you're going along with peers, but they don't actually have the power to or authority to direct your actions. So if your peers all of a sudden say, hey, let's go out past curfew, if your state or city has a mandated curfew and you decide to go out, If you go along with them, that's conformity, just because your peers really don't have the power to say, oh, well, you didn't do this, so then you're going to be punished or something like that. They don't have that authority like you are you. However, obedience is going along with higher authority. There's a hierarchy that's there, and well, it could be established, but it doesn't have to be. So in the case of the Milgram experiment, for instance, there's an obedience to higher authority because the participants were complying with the scientist in the room, right? The guy in the white lab coat who just, said quotes about, the experiment must continue. You have to continue. The experiment must continue. And they're just like, I'm having an existential crisis over here. And they're just like, you got to keep going. And so that act of continuing onward, even though, and you can see the distress of people in the video, they still conformed. They still went along with that obedience to the authority. So that's one type of social control too, is if we follow the laws, we're being kind of controlled that way. So regarding more formal instances of social control, the most formal is that of prisons, with solitary confinement being one of the harshest forms of prisons. So, and in examining this, with solitary confinement, for those of you who don't know, usually a person spends about 23 hours in like a cell without any windows or whatever, and then they're allowed to get out for that 1 hour, and usually they spend it outside or in daylight or something like that. But that's kind of one of the more extreme areas of social control. And thinking about prisons just in general too, the U.S. has some of the highest incarceration rates in the world. And in examining the 2020 statistics as of kind of during the pandemic and everything, regarding this high incarceration rate, we had 655 prisoners per 100,000 U.S. residents. And in examining and trying to find like a country that usually we compare to, like China or Russia or any of the European countries, there weren't any on that list. It was like Rwanda. El Salvador was the second highest at 590. And we had like our U.S. territories, like Guam was on the list, the Marshall Islands. Those were there, or the Virgin Islands rather, but like none of the bigger countries that we kind of think of as like first world countries. None of them were on like the top 10 or even the top 15 that I was trying to find. So that's very interesting. It also kind of shows how we kind of view our prison system, and we kind of tend to focus on that a lot too. Whereas in other countries, thinking about that globalization factor, prison, it's not really a thing, and the conditions of their prisons differ by country as well. Norway, for instance, has a really interesting aspect of it. Is it Sweden? One of them, like it's basically kind of like you're at a house and you're just staying there, and that's their prison. Whereas here, we have our locked up jail cells and everything like that, and it's just a bad place to be in. So that's just one aspect of the different social controls of the world. And then regarding the death penalty too, that's one of the most extreme sources of social control, right? Just because, once you're dead, it's kind of the ultimate form, because you're controlled. Even your death is controlled, and you're not allowed to do any more deviance in this living life anyway. And it used to be too, and we'll kind of get into this into the next slide, about the public spectacle of public deaths. And that's supposed to be a source of social control, because it makes a person not want to commit that, because that might happen to you. But in terms of modern day, the U.S. is also the only Western nation that employs the death penalty. And even then, that's kind of a hot topic. One of my colleagues in grad school did her master's thesis on the death penalty, and it comes up every now and again in the news, and how the ethics of it and everything like that too. So it's just very fascinating how we try to compare the U.S. with other Western nations, and then when we're thinking about incarceration rates or things like that, we don't rank up. Well, we're on the list of bad. I consider it a bad thing, but other countries aren't even on there that we usually compare them to. So it's just a little bit of a thinking point there. So if you did want to learn more about like the history of control, punishment, and the prison system and everything like that, this is a really good book. It's called Discipline and Punish by Michel Foucault or Michael Foucault, depending on who you are. He's French, so some people don't know how to say his name. But what he basically outlines is the history that we used to, as a form of social control, in the prison system, we used to like quarter people, which is like where they stretch out their limbs and then like until you die, you know, public executions, public hangings, and that kind of thing. It was a very public theater of torture, so to speak, a public spectacle. And you're like, oh, you don't want to end up like that kid or that person, you know, they stole whatever or they murdered somebody. Or even thinking back to the Salem witch trials, he doesn't cover that in this, but you know, thinking about just the act of deviance of being a witch and being burned at the stake, that kind of public spectacle, right? That public theater, so to speak. And his book kind of traces how we went from that all the way up to solitary confinement and basically turning it into from a public experience into a very private environmental one. So that kind of just changed gears 180 a little bit there, because you know, public spectacle, just think about all the different sounds that you might hear at a public execution or something like that, being quartered. You have like horses that are just quartering this person. The first few pages outline the quartering experience of a guy who was trying to assassinate the King of France. So, and so you go from that to sitting in a cell by yourself for 23 hours a day. And so it's a very shocking thing for a lot of people. And so Foucault kind of just goes through the history of that. It's a very deep book. I myself am still trying to read through the whole entire thing because it's a little bit hard on the reading difficulty, but it's super interesting. He also brings up this aspect of the panopticon, which is in this picture right here. What the panopticon is a prison system that demonstrates the social control of monitoring. You might notice that I had Big Brother is watching you and a security camera. Kind of similar to how security cameras are kind of monitoring us, right? If you see a security camera, maybe your actions are a little bit different than whether if you didn't have a security camera there. Say for like stealing something or just even just normal actions. You might sit up straight if you go down like the makeup aisle, for instance. Sometimes they have security cameras. You might like start walking straighter or change your gait or something like that just because you're on camera. Even me, like depending on how long I've been recording, you'll notice that my posture changes and things like that, and I get tired. So, but anyway, with the panopticon, this form of surveillance, and that's another key topic of Foucault's work, is surveillance and how we act when we're surveilled. This form of surveillance in the prison area is that there's a room. You can kind of see it. It kind of looks like a stick figure right here. And then all of these different areas right here are prison cells. And basically you have a room that can be manned by just one person manning all of these different prisoner cells, and because you have the feeling of somebody watching you. And you don't even have to have a person in the little, like I call it a control room, but the little area in the middle, because the prisoners don't know whether or not you're there or not, because the entrance isn't visible to them. So I think you kind of use an elevator or something and go in and out. But the prisoners don't even know that you're there if you are there. So the feeling of, well, are we being surveilled? Are we being watched, or aren't we? Can we be deviant or can't we? Very mental. It's a very mental process that's going on, which is probably why this fascinates me so much with surveillance and everything like that, because it is very mental. So for my psych people out there, there you go. But that's just one other aspect of it. Foucault's work is very widely well known in the criminal justice field, And we'll get, he'll pop up again later on when we talk about gender studies too, I think too. So, but he just examines the birth of the prison system, and it's very fascinating coming from a non-American viewpoint and kind of applying our American viewpoints too. So this was social control and how, depending on people's actions, that's basically how our control is by usually our relationships with people, but also by the surveillance that other people do. It could be our peers, it could be our friends, it could be our work. Thinking about our interaction, thinking about our work history on your work laptop or whatever, you're not supposed to, and you have not suitable for work websites and things like that, and it's because that's being surveilled, right? So that's what social control is and how we can kind of stop deviances by using social control. Then the next one that to close out this lecture series is going to be about crime. So I'll see you next time.